Welcome back, AP. All right, welcome back to sunny 7 o'clock in the morning right now, and we're going to get after it a little bit. We're going to jump straight in where we left off in class. We left off in class talking about Louis XIV and the growth of French absolutism, right? We looked at a lot of really, really cool pictures of Versailles. We kind of went back over everything with Louis's rise to power to make sure that everybody understands everything. Go day. Now, anyway, so also shout out to McKenna and Jordan who helped out so much at Academic Night. We really, really appreciate all your help. Now, look, but getting into it, though. So as we know, Louis is growing the population of the robe nobles. He's pitting them against the sword nobles. He created his royal court, which has all these ridiculous parties and stuff like that at his house every single night, creating basically like a rich people playground. He's watching wealthy people chase after little animals, and he's like actually like doing all this other crazy stuff. He's got people helping him go to the bathroom, and they feel honored to do so, right? So he does all this. He's making a ton of money by selling nobility and like land grants and nobility papal, like not papal, but nobility grants and like nobility like coats of arms and things like that. So he also though figures out a way to make nobility noble power and salary dependent on him by forcing the nobles to live with him at Versailles for a part of the year. And then also he creates an entire system where the nobles and their tax dividends that come in from the crown are coming directly from him rather than coming from the parlements when they were basically paying themselves. So in this sense, though, he also believes that you have to get rid of Protestants. He thought that the religious disunity of France was jumbled and gross and not accepting by him whatsoever. He was like, we are going to be a Catholic country through and through, one synonymous religion all the way through. So he wants to get rid of the Protestants completely. So he revoked the Edict of Nantes, right? He revoked the document that his grandfather brought in, Henry IV, and fought so hard to actually accomplish. Now, what he's going to do by doing this, he's going to burn Protestant churches, destroy Protestant schools, like basically try to run so many Protestants out. Now, what is a minor political method of why he might have done this? That's exactly right, Sam. So that is such a good answer. Because remember, some of the original beef between Catherine de' Medici and the Huguenots was a lot of nobles were converting to being Huguenot for power and superiority over their king or their leadership. So Louis is just like, oh, well, I'll just destroy all of you with my new professional army, right? So he starts pushing all of them out, and a lot of very, very wealthy and very affluent Protestant nobles flee France, and Louis likes it this way. Now, interesting little places they go, jot this down. A lot of these Protestants run away to places like Prussia, which is going to become a very big deal in a little bit. A lot of them run to the Dutch Republic, right, the Netherlands, which is going to become a very big deal in a little bit. And they also run to other places like England, right? So they're bringing their ideas, their money, and their thought with them as well, though. So that's a huge thing that we understand. So also, number 6, he wants to make more money. And so he adopts this concept called mercantilism, right? Now, this right here is really, really important. And I'll tell you the story about it in class when we get there. But that quote right there, which Louis may have never, ever actually even said, laissez-moi. So he may have actually never actually said this, but it's a very defining characteristic of Louis in and of himself. So, I'll tell you the whole story. I don't want to scream at 7 o'clock in the morning. I just can't pull it off right now, but I'll definitely be able to pull it off when I see y'all in the morning. So go ahead and jot that down. But that quote kind of defines what Louis believed he was, right? And it was a really, really big thing for a long time that everybody said, oh, that's what he said about himself. Now, so going forward, though, besides being obsessed with his legs, besides being and also, I'm not even kidding, he was really obsessed with his legs. Every single picture you'll see, he's just busting them out, right? He's just what's up? What's up? So now, look, Jean-Baptiste Colberto, or Jean-Baptiste Colbert, is going to be a very, very major figure in this entire setup. So Louis adopts this concept called mercantilism, right? So mercantilism is actually being brought in by his main financial advisor, Jean-Baptiste Colbert, who was actually one of his intendants and also his financial advisor. So this is one of the guys that he surrounded himself with. I don't think that Jean-Baptiste Colbert is a noble. I'd have to check and double check, but I don't think he is. So Jean-Baptiste Colbert, though, was a very, very, very smart individual when it came to raising money. Just like we're going to start raising money for the trip soon, you need to understand that mercantilism could possibly be a way that we could get that done. Because what mercantilism is in general, and also highlight Jean-Baptiste Colbert's name, we will talk about him in multiple other units, but he is a very, very prominent figure. And so mercantilism, what it is this idea about money. It's a system of economic regs or regulations that tries to make as much money as possible for a national government. And it all hinges on one belief. that there is a finite amount of money in circulation, that there's only so much money in the world, and when all of that money has been accessed, the money will be gone. Now, remember, though, this is when monetary systems were based in gold and silver bullion, right? So this is actually, technically, Jean-Baptiste Colbert is not wrong. So when you look at the systems of adoption and the systems of how everything works, in a way, Jean-Baptiste Colbert is not inaccurate. There is only a certain amount of gold and silver out there. Now, granted, mercantilism is dumb in essence, though, because we don't even use money like gold or silver-backed money anymore, and it actually is all just banknotes and things like that, which actually also was adopted during Louis's reign a little bit later on, going into the reign of Louis XV, actually, when this guy named John Law shows up, and he's the very first person to print money in France, and basically like, collapses the entire French economy. Now, the thing about it, though, is mercantilism believes that since there's only a certain amount of money in the world, that rulers and monarchs and absolutists must do their best to gobble up as much of it as possible, right? To have and hoard as much of it in their country as possible so they can hopefully have more than their next door neighbor, right? So it's another nationalistic sense. It's another idea of our country is better than yours because we have X amount of dollars more or we have more than you, right? So basically the idea is like accrue as much gold and silver as possible. Now, how can you also do this in a sense if you have this problem of like the Columbian exchange and a transatlantic economy, though, where everyone's buying goods from the Spanish or everybody's buying goods from the English and stuff like that? So one huge thing that Louis absolutely hated was, for example, the purchase and sale of cotton, right? So cotton was beginning to be created, I emphasize beginning to be created in its infancy in England using this thing called the putting out system and the cottage system, right? And so cotton was like dexterous, light, breathable, and could easily be washed, right? Well, the thing is that the French had never figured out how to make it, and they never figured out a system of making it. So Louis did this thing where he enacted high tariffs on it, and then he eventually banned it in France completely, right? Because he believed that if you're going out and purchasing English cotton, you are giving French money to English people, and that's affecting this mercantilistic idea, right? Now, did people buy cotton anyway? Of course they did, right? They actually smuggled it in. Smuggling is a very, very big thing when you're talking about mercantilism, and because it's the idea that, of course, like, oh, we're spending our money on other people, so the money is escaping the country's borders. Again, mercantilism doesn't make a lot of sense, but in essence, if you have a giant pile of gold in your house and you think that's how it works, then, like, you're going to have a lot of money in front of you. And another huge thing, though, is what a tariff is, right? Oh, also, one other thing that Louis absolutely hated was the fact that they had to buy tobacco from England, too, all the time. So the tariffs, right? Tariffs are high taxes on imports to drive the price up to hopefully prevent people from spending their money with other governments and other goods, right? So mercantilism is a very, very important thing, even though, like I said, it's not even actually a thing or true or whatever. Now, another thing, though, going forward is that Louis loves to fight wars, right? Huge fan of fighting wars. Actually, when we jump all the way back real quick, we can actually see how much a fan of he is of fighting wars. This right here is actually Louis standing victoriously on his steps as a sword noble who actually was in charge of a certain military expedition comes forward after returning from exile following the Fronde because he actually helped the French take over a certain area. And as you look at all these different flags right here, those are the flags of the countries that Louis has taken over, right? So Louis loves to fight wars, right? And he believes that it is a major element of absolutism to extend your power and reign as far as it will go, right? So he loved to be called the conqueror. And he spent 33 years of his 54-year reign at war, which is absolutely insane. So, like, if you're spending 33 years of a 54-year war or 54-year reign at war, well, first of all, some of you are like, wow, he was in charge for 54 years. This dude didn't die. I'm really, really surprised. Yeah, he actually lived to be like in his 70s, which is actually bananas, like for the era and the time. So something that you have to understand, well, actually, would he be like 58? Would he have been 58? I'll look it up. Now, so the big thing, though, going into it, his 54-year reign had 33 years of war in it. So he made all this possible, of course, by creating that professional army that we talked about, which has standards, uniforms, guns, rations, things like that. Louis is going to have that system simulated, modeled, and imitated all over Europe because people are going to start looking at his ability to fight wars, and they're going to be like, oh, well, we could do this too. Let's create our own professional army, right? Now, the biggest war that he ever had, though, was actually one that he lost, and some people believe that the stress of it alone might have led to his death because he actually died in 715, and this war ended in 713. So this war is called the War of Spanish Secession. So I don't know if y'all remember this guy or not, Carlos II of Spain. Carlos II of Spain. So Carlos II of Spain is the last Habsburg ruler of Spain because he was so inbred and so incest that he literally couldn't walk or talk properly. His chin came out. He drooled all the time. Like he was a very, 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 very genetically malformed individual, right? So because of this, he was also sterile. So he could never have any children. And yes, some woman married this, which is a very, very intense thing. But he was the last Habsburg ruler of Spain. So when we're looking at this entire system and looking at the entire construction of all these things in this war that's about to be coming up, Carlos II died without any heir to the throne, right? So, and that's the King of Spain at the time. And since he died without any heir to the throne, there we go. Now, there we go. Rule is going to end up And since he died without any heir to the throne, rule is going to end up passing through succession to Louis's grandson. Do we not remember this whole problem with marriages of convenience, right? Really quick, Morgan Godet brought it up in class, and so did Gabrielle Frino, and was just like, well, everybody's married to a Habsburg pretty much. You're right. Everybody is married to a Habsburg. And that also means that maybe some of Louis's daughters got married off to Habsburgs as well, right? And so the thing that ends up happening is that the King of Spain is going to die, and freaking Louis's grandson takes the throne in Spain, or is expected to. And so what ends up happening is Louis tries to exert his claim over Spanish money, Spanish crown, Spanish goods, Spanish land, and all these other different items. And so a massive war broke out when Louis tried to get colonies, goods, territory, and basically, in a nutshell, tried to do what Cardinal Richelieu never could and almost annex Spain into his entire country. So what's going to end up happening, though, is for the very first time in European history, you're going to see this thing known as a coalition, right? So a coalition forms of a bunch of different other countries. The English, the Dutch, the Austrians, the Prussians, even a little bit of the Russian nobility united against France. And France is going to eventually lose this war because you can't fight the entire continent of Europe. I don't care if you have Spain and France. You're not going to beat the whole continent of Europe. And so what ends up happening, though, is that this kind of unofficially set limits on the expansion of European powers, right? So he lost a ton of money in this war, like a lot of money in this war. And at the Peace of Utrecht, which Utrecht is actually a city in the Netherlands. At the Peace of Utrecht, unofficially, this is going to set limits on European power expansion. And it kind of creates the tradition in Europe that if any one country is getting too large and too powerful, the rest will come together, unite against them, and actually suppress them and prevent them from taking over everything. Except unless you're talking about Hitler and stuff like that in the 1940s, but we'll get to that later on. Now, France is going to lose their territory in North Africa. They're going to lose parts of their territory in Canada. They're going to lose this place called the Strait of Gibraltar. And the Strait of Gibraltar is going to go to the British, and it's going to become a major tradeway. And the Strait of Gibraltar is actually between Morocco and Spain. It's right down there at the end of Spain. Still belongs to Britain to this day. And a rule of Spain is going to pass to Philip V, Louis's grandson, but basically what happened was Louis had to be forced to acknowledge that Spain was going to be its own country. And the thing about it is that they didn't have to worry too much longer anyway, because Louis died less than 2 years later, right? Louis may have made a ton of money, but he lost most of it in all these crazy wars that he was fighting. The War of Spanish Secession. You're talking about lingering debt and destruction from the 30 Years' War. You're talking about a lot of different stuff, right? So in an essence, Louis has been marred with this kind of image of, yeah, he made a lot of money by selling the nobility all this stuff, but he also created a giant nobility class that was super apathetic to the needs of the people, right? And that they didn't pay much in taxes. So he lost some of these costly wars. He actually lost about half of them, not most of. And then also in extravagant spending. Versailles alone could have easily bankrupt the annual tax revenue of France. But he left France after he died in crippling debt because he thought only of himself and just constantly was considering himself the Sun King rather than taking care of the place where his light apparently shone the brightest, right? So now what we're going to move into now is just a little bit of a new topic. So we're now going to be moving over to Spain, and we're going to talk about really quickly why Spain never had any absolute power, right? So the decline of Spanish power is really, really going to get kickstarted right after the English or the Spanish Armada, right? Now, this is a very, very ironic thing because you would think in the long-term plan of things that Spain would have been able to actually grow and conquer and have a massive amount of influence during this time period and also be able to basically defend themselves. Well, the problem is that actually they kind of made too much money. And I'm going to explain that here in a second. But what it is that 60% decline of trade with the colonies, right? So what is going to end up going down is that Spain is going to lose a lot of territory in North America due to the fact that England and the English and the Dutch are going to start showing up and trading a lot more goods with everybody else in the colonies, due to the fact that the Dutch and the English could provide things much cheaper. So we're seeing this smuggling problem again, right? So the Dutch, which are involved in the Asian spice trade, and we have the English and Dutch East India companies that are vying for influence, and they're trading with the colonies. You've got natives dying from the encomienda system, from disease, and the mines are beginning to run dry, right? You also, royal debt is crazy high because Philip wanted to actually spend a lot of money to fight the Dutch and fight the English and do all this other stuff. So to try and make it so the money would go a little bit further, he constantly had to devalue it to pay like his debts. And what devaluing your money is in this era is basically taking your coins and making them smaller and smaller, but saying that they're worth the same amount, and that's not actually true, right? Because that's actually going to lead to massive amounts of inflation. And also what's going to happen then at this point is like Spaniards are going to condemn hard work because they made so much money up front that everybody is basically going to be like, oh, well, we're all rich now, so I don't have to work hard anymore. So they're going to condemn hard work and degrade the middle class. A bunch of them are going to join the church so they can avoid ever paying taxes ever again. Rents are skyrocketing. There's no money for military. Spain is losing war after war after war, and by 1688, their power is pretty much crippled and gone in all of Europe. And going into it, what ends up happening, of course, is their Habsburg monarchy is dying out. Now, jot this down really quick, which is a very, very important thing. Spain also really, in the long run in this entire thing, lost all of its power following the Armada because they were bringing in too much gold and silver. So in this process, when they were bringing in too much gold and silver, it caused a massive amount of inflation inside of the Spanish country in general. And then also what ended up happening is, speaking of that like degrading hard work thing, there was a class and group of people that used to actually work really hard a lot of the time and provide a lot of services to a lot of Spanish people constantly. And there were these people called the Jews and the Muslims, but they don't exist in Spain anymore because Isabel and Ferdinand ran them all out in the Spanish Inquisition, right? So now you've got this issue in Spain of trade's going down. The natives are dying. The royal debt's going up. You've got like all these different things happening. You also have the fact that there are no Jews and Muslims that are there that are actually providing certain craft working skills and things like that to the entirety of the Spanish population. You've got all these people in Spain also buying goods from other countries because you have this upper class is way too large now and a middle class is not big enough to provide them with goods or materials, right? Rent's going up. No money for military. And Spain, basically in a nutshell, kind of like bit off more than they could chew and ended up dying out because of economics, right? Inflation will be the thing that kills them, though. So absolutism in Austria. And Prussia, though, we're going to pick up in Prussia right after this. Austria, though, just so you know, we're going to go ahead and wrap this flip up real quick. Austria is going to end up kind of dying off a little bit right after the 30 Years' War, but they are going to come back with a fury. So for a very long time, the Austrians were like basically, or the Habsburgs were like, oh, we control anything and everything, right? So they controlled Spain, the Netherlands, the Holy Roman Empire, Austria, and all the lands that Austria acquired and owned. Well, the problem was that after the 30 Years' War, the Austrians and the Austrian Habsburgs, of course, we know that the Austrian Habsburgs control the Holy Roman Empire because Charles V split the family in half. They are going to be defeated and exhausted. They had to give up. They had to basically relinquish power to the princes and the nobility of the HRE. And the HRE seems to be kind of just limping along, and it seems to be a lost cause, and it will never be as big and as powerful as it once was. And the true power of the HRE actually lies in the hands of these princes, not even necessarily the Holy Roman Emperor himself. The Habsburgs then instead decide to focus on Austria, not the Holy Roman Empire. And so what they do is they go out and they start annexing new territories inside of the Holy Roman Empire to try and grow their influence there. And so the Habsburgs grew their borders by annexing and invading Bohemia, which is the modern-day Czech Republic. They do this by using Catholic nobility. They basically actually stripped land and rights away from any Protestant nobility in Bohemia because they blamed them for starting the 30 Years' War in and of itself and replaced all the Protestant nobles with Catholic nobles in totality. And then also another big one, and all the Catholic nobles were loyal to the Habsburgs, so they basically just went, and they just like annexed Bohemia Transylvania inside of Austria. And then Hungary is going to be an interesting one because they took over a third of Hungary because they actually won a couple of wars against the Ottomans. Now, Hungary is going to take a little bit longer, but eventually later on in history, Austria will take over the rest of Hungary, and Austria will turn into Austria-Hungary. But we'll talk about that when we get closer to like the 1900s. So as you can see right here, this pink right here, that is Austrian territory in 1648. And that is right at the end of the 30 Years' War. They then annexed this area right here, including Silesia, which we'll talk about that when we get into the War of Austrian Secession, and then actually this area right here of Hungary, they end up like taking this area as well. This part of it ends up belonging to the Ottoman empires for quite some time, and then this part over here was known as Transylvania, which was just an independent kingdom. So like when we're looking at Austria, the thing that you need to know about them is they're just growing their power and influence, and they're going to be a major player a little bit later on. But during this main absolutist era, they didn't really have a ton of absolutists just due to the fact that they were busy trying to grow as much land and power as they possibly could. But we're going to go ahead and leave off right there. I'll let y'all go. Y'all have a great evening. Talk to y'all soon.